Hello there, my name's Nate Bowers. I'm from Fort Collins, Colorado. I was born and raised in the great state of Colorado. And I've been driving horses and been around driving horses my whole life. I was born and raised to a man who is considered one of the biggest names in actually driving horses and pretty much the only name in training a horse to drive naturally. His name is Steve Bowers, and I traveled around with him for my entire youth. When I was in 7th grade, he actually started homeschooling me himself so he could get to hang out with me and get to teach me and get me to learn his trade and to learn how to train a horse to drive. I learned from him for quite a while. When I was 18, he died and he left me his company, and I was given the choice that I could either go to college, continue on with my education, or if I could maybe stay with it and try and keep it going. And I've been really blessed with the fact that I've been able to keep it going, and I've been able to take it and innovate it and change it and grow it in a lot of ways. And it's really exciting and fun to see all the different things that are coming along and to see how much the people and the horses are changing that I'm encountering with. The driving business is an industry that I really have a passion for. I'm really excited for it. I'm excited to see it go into the next era of its experience. I think that it's an industry that's been left behind on its training in a lot of ways and in its education. So I'm really excited to get to be a part of the education, and I'm excited to be able to be a part of the newest innovation and growth of the industry. So what we're going to do in this video product is we're going to bring together the education. Training a horse is one thing and training the human is another. And a lot of times what we run into is where people are doing one or the other. They're not really breaking it down. It's a breakdown that really I feel like it needs to happen, where we need an understanding as learners and as an industry, where we say there's two separate subjects here. Subject number one is education of the horse. And then subject number two is education of the human. There's a lot, if you look at this horse hitch, this cart, there's a lot of stuff on there, and it's all working together, and it's either going to work together in a positive way or in a negative way. And it's really important that we understand the science behind it and the reason behind what it's doing there, so that we can increase our ability to have things go well. One of the saddest things I ever see happen is when people take and they gloss over the mechanics of the education. They skip this, they skip the point where they learn how things work and why they work the way they do and how to adjust them properly, and they just worry about the training the horse part. They skip the educating the human, and they just worry about the training the horse because it's way more entertaining. Training the horse is 10 times more entertaining than us doing the learning, but it's really, really important. And the sad thing is when we skip that and then we take a horse that's beautifully trained and we put him into the cart wrong, or we adjust things wrong, we set it up to be very, very hard for the horse to have a positive and successful experience. So the idea behind this video is we really want to give you a 40,000 foot view. We want to give you the very high altitude view of how all of this harness works, how the horse works within the harness, and what the understanding of the vehicle and the harness kind of needs to be. This is going to be intended for people who are trying to learn themselves how to drive. This is not intended to be for the horse's education. There'll be some things as we go along that'll be very important for your horsemanship, but the real purpose and point of this is to really educate the human about the mechanics and dynamics of taking care of all of this stuff that's on my horse. It's one of those things that it's kind of like your car, you know what I mean? You want to know, it would be if you needed to know how to change the oil and fix the brakes and everything else. It's kind of like that with a driving horse. You need to be able to change the oil and fix the brakes and tune it and do everything else. And so we need to make sure that we understand the mechanics behind all of this, so we never get our horse into a position where they have a negative experience because of our lack of knowledge. If you're in our project here with us, where we're on part 2 of the 3-part series, then this will fit in perfectly for your education, because if you're training your horse to drive, you need to know how this works. But also, if you've purchased a horse that already knows how to drive, it's essential that you learn these things, because you'll find that he might learn how to not drive quite quickly if you do these things wrong. So my hope is I can set you up to where you can be as successful as possible, and that you'll have a really excellent driving experience that will be safe and fun for both you and your horse. So if you just look at harness from an overall picture, it can be kind of overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff up here, and there's a lot of things doing all kinds of weird things that if you look at them, as individuals, it's pretty complicated to exactly figure out what's going on there. What we have on here is we have pretty much a standard American style pleasure driving harness. This is a harness that you're going to find most places. Remember that there's a lot of variances to harnesses. You're going to find ones that are going to have goofy little things and things like that, but the base understanding of them is going to be the same. Okay, so within harness, every harness has to do 4 basic things. There has to be 4 systems in place for the harness to function properly. Those 4 systems are the pulling system, the braking system, the steering system, and the communication system. So it's kind of like, if you think about, if I was going to build a car, it would not be a very good car if it only had a gas pedal, right? It would be a terrible car. Or if it only had a steering wheel and it didn't go anywhere, that wouldn't be much fun either. You know, so in and of themselves, they're no good. It's when they all are together that you get what you're looking for, and that's a fully functioning vehicle. 4 systems of the harness. That's a really important thing to think about, okay? So the 4 systems, we'll just break them down for you. The first one we're going to say will be the pulling system, okay? So the thing that causes the horse to get this buggy to move forward would be her breast strap, which is up here around her shoulder, and her traces, which are going to run along the long side of her and hook into our vehicle, okay? So breast strap and traces, that's what pulls the vehicle, okay? Now the thing that turns the vehicle. Okay, so we have pulling. Now turning or steering would be the saddle up here, up top, coming down, and the shaft loops down here. Okay, so anywhere the shaft loops go, if she moves the shaft loops left, that moves the shafts left, which moves the cart left. Okay, so this is what steers the vehicle. Okay, the next system would be braking. And the brakes on this deal here, there's no brakes on my wagon. The brakes are on the harness, okay? And the brakes are from this side, the holdback strap, which is wrapped around my shaft, the britchin, which goes around her hind end, and then over to the other side with the other holdback strap. Okay, so now we have pulling, steering, braking, and there's one more system, and that last system is actually the most important system. A lot of times I don't feel like it gets its proper credit, and it doesn't get the proper amount of respect that it really deserves. And that system is the communication system, right? The thing that actually tells the horse to stop the load, pull the load, steer the load. That's what matters the most. That's what's going to keep you safe. That's what's going to get your horse to actually turn where he's supposed to turn, stop where he's supposed to stop, all that sort of thing. So the most important system always, you've got to remember to prioritize it, would be the communication system. The communication system is made up of your lines or reins that are going to be back here. They're tied up onto her back, running forward, and her bridle. Okay, so that's the communication system. That's what tells this horse whether I want her to stop, whether I want her to go forward, backward, left, or right. So that is the most important thing. Okay, this has to work first, and if this doesn't work, then the rest of it doesn't matter, right? So it's kind of like we used to have a thing at our local racetrack, our car racing track, and what they'd do is they did a thing called trains. They'd take one car and weld it on the back, and then a middle car, and then a front car. And the front car, that guy would have the steering and the gas pedal, and the guy on the back would have the brakes, and they couldn't talk to each other. And then they'd do a figure-8 track. It's very entertaining because of the fact that you didn't know if he was going to go or if he was going to whoa. You had no clue because the communication system was split between 2 people that were seeing 2 different things. So the communication is essential, right? So you don't get in a wreck just like they used to do with those train cars. That's what they call them, trains, at the local racetrack. So it's really important to me that the communication system be prioritized over anything else. You'll notice as I talk that, like, I might say reins 1 minute and then say lines the next minute. And one of the biggest reasons I do that is because I travel all over the country teaching everywhere from the East Coast to the West Coast. And the East Coast and the West Coast have different vernacular for the same things. They're going to say like crupper on one side and crooper on the other. They're going to call them breeching and britchin. They're going to call it lines, they're going to call it reins, they're going to call it blinds, they're going to call it blinkers. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to be really torn. And the biggest thing to remember is that neither one is inherently wrong or right in my mind. There's not like lines is not right and reins is not right. It just depends on who you're talking to. So the biggest thing is to make sure that you're really, I always try and be really humble with my vernacular. Like, I don't think that, you know, these are reins and reins alone. They're reins to me, but to a guy on the West Coast, it might be lines. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So it's important that you be able to have a broad spectrum of vernacular and a broad understanding of, you know, different cultural areas are going to call things a different name. So, so we've got our 4 systems here. We've got pulling, right? So if you were to watch this, ready, watch. I'll take my horse, and if she was to step forward, then her chest, if she'd wake up, come on, baby. She'd push her chest into the breast strap, which would pull on the traces, which pulls the load forward. I think you could see that pretty good right there. Okay, and then the same thing's true for backwards. So if I put pressure up here, then her butt is going to push into the britchin, and that's going to push and pull the holdbacks, and that's going to cause the vehicle to back up, right? So that's how we get backwards. We get forwards by all these here. We get backwards from those there, right? And then we've got communication, and then steering, again, is our saddle with our shaft loop. So if she was to step over to the left, that would bring the shafts over to the left, and the vehicle would turn to the left. Now that you know where the 4 systems are and what they're doing, you might look at this harness and say, now what's the rest of the harness doing? And the answer is that the rest of this stuff, like the shoulder strap, the back strap, the hip strap, all that stuff is to keep the harness in place. Except for this little piece back here. This is what's called a kick strap. The purpose of the kick strap is exactly like it sounds. It's to keep the horse from kicking. If you were to look kind of at a wide shot here, you could look and see that if I was sitting up there with my head up there, where would she have to do, what would she have to do to get her butt high enough, to get her feet high enough to kick me, right? And kicking is a definite thing that can happen even with a horse that's been really well trained. There's a really famous guy, he had shown his horse a lot and done a lot with it, traveled around a lot with it, and he lived right near us, and he was over visiting the neighbors. And as he was visiting the neighbors, he was just sitting there with his horse hitched, and he was sitting in the cart with his wife, and they were talking, and out of nowhere the horse started to kick. And it kicked, and it kicked, and it kicked, and it kicked, and it kicked the snot out of the cart. It ended up hurting the lady a lot, it hurt the gentleman a lot, and it killed the horse. And so they did a necropsy on the horse, and they looked at him and they said, well, why was this really well-trained horse, why did he start kicking so much to kick the cart to smithereens and hurt himself? So they necropsied him, and they looked him over, and they found that he'd actually been stung by a hornet on his sheath. And so it was one of those things that's an act of God. That's not something that, we don't really train horses to be ready for that. That's not very easy to prepare for. That's just one of those things that happens. And this little insurance policy right here would keep that from happening. The way that this functions is that we're essentially tying the horse's butt down. Okay, so we all know that for a horse to kick, if my hand was her front end and my elbow was her back end, that she'd have to get her head down quite low, and she'd have to get her butt up quite high to be able to even hit the cart, right? She could cow kick and not have to move her butt up off the ground very much. But to really kick, if you ever watch like a rodeo or something like that, watch and see how high does the hind end come for the horse to really kick out. And for him to kick out hard enough to catch my cart or to even catch me, she'd have to get her butt up pretty high. And so the purpose of this is it keeps the butt down. Okay, so what I've done is I've just created a lever here. The shaft is the lever. This kick strap is now the fulcrum. Okay, so for her to kick, and for her to get her butt high enough to kick me in the cart, she would actually end up having to lift the cart off the ground. You can see how that would work. If I lift this up, she's going to only be able to get her butt up to about this high with this setting, and that's perfect. That's plenty safe. She's going to be able to lope in this. She's going to be able to do everything she needs to do and never be able to tell that it's on there. A common misconception that I hear a lot of people say is they call this a buck strap. They say this is a buck strap. This is not a buck strap. There's nothing I've ever seen that keeps them from bucking. They can buck like the dickens in one of these, but they can't kick you, right? So that it holds the hind end down, so they can't really ever get that extension or that real big kick with the hind end. So the purpose is safety, and I use it all the time just simply because of the fact that it's so simple for it to be there. It's so simple for it to function properly, and it's not hurting a thing, but it could save my life, and it could save my horse's life. So it's one of those things I really believe in. Just simply for those reasons right there. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and show you exactly what the 3 systems of the vehicle are.